Hi, welcome to Broken Silence. I'm Sanyya Gardez. Today we're talking about domestic violence. 1 in 4 women will experience some sort of domestic abuse in her life, and as you're watching us now, 1 in 9 women will be abused physically. Joining me on the panel is Firdaus Taj, a social scientist. Thank you for joining us today, Firdaus.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
Now, you've been a victim of abuse.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well, firstly, I don't like to be referred to as a victim. I don't think any woman is a victim because I find the term quite disempowering.
Okay.
I do believe that every woman, although it's the most difficult decision in the world, she does have the ultimate power over her situation.
What would be a better word to use?
I think a survivor,
Okay.
or somebody who's experienced domestic violence. For me, domestic violence, there are 2 forms of it. There are psychological and there are physical. I was married for 3 years to a first cousin.
Arranged marriage?
Well, it's kind of semi-arranged. I was quite happy with it, so there was no force or anything like that. Sponsored him to come to England, and I think, as I mentioned on your last episode, that I realised 3 years later that I was just a meal ticket, and the only way he could get out of the marriage without bringing the blame onto himself was to use some form of violence, which
How
escalated.
did it start? Did it start immediately after you got married, or was there a certain amount of time that had passed before it became abusive?
Yeah, the signs were there from the beginning. But
what kind of signs were there?
There were generally signs of control. Would be things like when I was actually in Pakistan, I would never be taken out anywhere. I was always left in the same place for days on end. If I asked, to be able to contact my family at home, my letters were never posted. So these small signs, because I wanted to believe that my marriage would work out, I overlooked them.
Mm-hmm.
And it escalated, firstly when I was pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it became physically abusive while you were pregnant?
Yes. And I believe, as I think a lot of women will probably confirm, that when you're pregnant, you are more vulnerable and a man is more confident that you won't leave him and you are physically not in a position to resist him, perhaps. So when I was pregnant with my son, it escalated. When I was pregnant with my daughter, it became even worse.
Well, what happened? I mean, what was that first incident about? What was it like? What happened?
Well, I can't actually pinpoint a first incident because it was just so subtle. But I think, and I think that this may be the pattern generally, where psychological violence will come first, and then it will escalate into physical as the man becomes more confident.
Okay.
For me, it was swearing and belittling and isolating.
But for those, for couples watching us now, when couples get into heated arguments, they will swear at each other. They will do everything they can to make the other person feel bad. So somebody might just say, well, it's just a normal couple having a fight. How can you, what needs to be done to quantify it as abuse?
I think when it's consistent and when you feel that you haven't actually done anything to provoke that situation, and then when you feel a sense of that you're losing control, and I couldn't control it anymore, and it was persistent, and you know that it's escalating, and it escalated into physical abuse.
Were you afraid for your life?
I was particularly when he started strangling me.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I passed out on several occasions.
What happened? Were you living with your in-laws? Were you living on your own?
No, we were living on our own, and I had 2 little children. My daughter, I think, was only weeks old.
And you were in Pakistan at the time? Or
No,
I
was here in Britain.
Where did you go? What did you do?
Well, that's even more harrowing because my family, their attitude was, you have to suffer for Izzat's sake. My father, because he was my father's paternal nephew, it was in my father's interest to try and keep a lid on it. So then it created resentment between me and my father.
Did you go to your parents, right away when this started, or did you wait and contemplate before getting them involved?
I waited and contemplated because he was my first cousin. There were dire consequences for everybody. So, and I tolerated it until I just felt I can't.
So you went home and you said, Mom, Dad, my husband is hitting me. He's abusing me.
Yeah.
And did they offer any sympathy? Were they empathetic? Did they ask you to stay with them?
No, I think their attitude was, well, whatever may come, you have to make the marriage work. You have to make the marriage work, which gave me a sense that, he's definitely in control now. So at one point then I realised that I have to make a decision myself.
Well, their statistics show that women, Asian women who suffer abuse, are are twice as likely to commit suicide than their non-Asian counterparts. Did you suffer from depression?
Oh yes. Well, my situation was made worse because he was being physically violent when I was pregnant. I also perhaps had postnatal depression as well.
Okay.
Now, I don't know whether postnatal depression and depression from the violence were actually intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I was depressed, but I couldn't then allow that to overwhelm me.
Well, for those, I mean, your parents were saying, okay, you're married now, and you know, you're not coming back. That's it. You've got to stay and make it work. When you don't have the support of your family, what did you do? Who did you turn to?
Well, I was very naive in that I thought, well, I have to go outside the Asian community, you know, and I have to look at legislation and see if there's anything on the legal side I can do. Is
there something
well,
for women watching this now who might be suffering at the hands of their partners? Is there anything they can do?
I don't want to frighten women into staying in any abusive relationship. I would never support that. But I would like to make women aware that nothing is easy. It's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be, you're going to remove yourself from one situation and the others, and there's going to be a whole network of support. Don't expect that. Always rely on your own wits, because legislation is not that supportive of women either. For me, violence was on several levels. I first experienced it directly at the hands of my husband.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was the abuse. I felt subtle abuse from the community.
How so?
Well, they pointed the finger at me. We're going back into the early 90s now. Things may slightly have changed with the younger generation. But in those days, it's blame the woman attitude.
Well, you know, for those who'd be surprised, not that much has changed. Even now, younger women who are in abusive relationships, the finger is usually pointed at them. Well, what did you do to get your husband or partner upset? So even though this happened with you in the early 90s, we haven't really come that far.
Yeah, that's a shame actually. So they blamed me. The whole community blamed me. It has to be the woman, and I knew it was simply because I was the woman.
Right.
It was blatantly obvious, you know, what was going on. Within 10 months of receiving his indefinite leave to remain, he'd gone, and yet the community still pointed the finger at me.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, and I was left with 2 children. My daughter was 3 months old.
So not only did he abuse you,
yeah,
he then walked out on you with 2 kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Where did you go from there? How are your kids affected by this?
Well, I was very lucky that the state did support me in the sense that I was lucky I had my own property. But whilst I was still in the relationship, I did actually go to a refuge for abused women as a way of removing myself from that environment.
Okay.
And then I came to my senses and I thought, hang on a minute, why am I leaving my matrimonial home when he's the perpetrator? So I returned and decided to have him removed.
How did you do that?
Well, this is something that quite bothered me at the time. The police won't intervene unless there are physical signs. So I thought, well, hang on, this is not right.